Oh, there he is. Okay. So, Henrik, we're not doing formal introductions because all our bios are posted on the website. So feel free to... Henrik, you're mute? No.
No. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I hope my audio works. I'm so nice to see you all, and thank you for the invitation. And so great to hear so many familiar voices. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you there. I'm on the other side of the Andes, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, but here I am anyway. But thanks again for inviting me and for asking me to talk a little bit about some of the experiences from working between science and art, inspired by Sarah's. I'll try to share my screen here. Can you hear me okay, Jorge?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, great. Okay, so I want to try to talk about some of the discoveries between science and art, and what it's been like to slow down in Uruguay and Stockholm. And I want to try to answer these questions: who I am, what Ceres has been for me, what it is for me, where it started and where it's going, if I made any useful discoveries at all, if art changed what I'm doing, and if it led to any kinds of improvement, or if I learned anything in the process. So I work at Stockholm Resilience Center, and I have had the privilege to work at the Ceres Institute for, well, almost a decade now, off and on. And my background is in ecology. So I'm really interested in ocean ecosystems and the way they are managed. And my background is basically from studying these fish-eating seabirds way out on these remote ocean islands. On the west there, it's a nice island in off the northern tip of Vancouver Island in Canada. And the picture to the right is the birds I did my PhD on in the Swedish Baltic Sea. So I have really interested in these birds, and that's basically my PhD in understanding these animals and how they interact with their environment, but increasingly also try to understand what humans are doing when they are managing ocean ecosystems. I think to me, Ceres is a place where it's an incredible luxury to be at Ceres. It's such an enormous privilege, and I'm just completely grateful for the opportunities it has represented. And to me, Ceres is, people walking together on a beach, talking about things big and small, most of the time things that they had not had time to think about in their normal life because we're busy running around and doing all kinds of things. But on the beach in Uruguay, that's where you have the real conversations and you learn so much new things. It's also a place where you can sit alone by a stream and just contemplate what you've heard and learned during the day. And it's, of course, you know this, but Uruguay is such a beautiful and amazing and tranquil place that leaves lots of room for contemplation. It's also a place where you can discover new things and interact with interesting animals and, well, obviously reconnect to the biosphere. And I love the way this animal is just exploring the edge of my shade here, try to make contact slowly but surely. So I think this is really about conversations and slowing down and having time to do things that normally there isn't space for in at least my university life. So to me, Sarah started 2013. It's a long time ago now, it seems. I can at least see from my hair color that something has changed since then. But I also know that a lot of things have changed on the inside from this meeting. This is together with Carl Folke and Diego Galafasi and Anna Emelin, all from Stockholm Resilience Center, who were part of a workshop at Sarah's in 2013, organized by Frances Westley, where she invited lots of scientists and lots of artists and provided lots of really, really valuable reading material that I think hopefully can still be useful to colleagues at Sarah's, because it's such a wealth of information of how to connect sciences and art. And what we did during this workshop, actually during 2 years, was to explore creativity and all kinds of different ways to engage across the sciences and artists. And that resulted in a special issue. The first papers come out in 2015, and there's a whole range of articles that talks about how we use archetypes, how we engage in creativity, how we, the paper we wrote with Martin and Francis and others was about magic and how magic tricks the brain, and how from learning by how magicians trick people, we can learn more about how we can be better at complexity thinking and look at things from different perspectives. So if you haven't seen this special issue, I think it's a really valuable resource as well. And some interesting discoveries, I think, really in the intersection between science and art. I think something that really was inspiring for me was not just these meetings and the workshops, but the main thing for me was meeting two amazing Chilean artists during these activities. And one is the painter Angela Leible, and then also her partner sculptor Francisco Gacitua, also a Chilean. I can probably, this is the rock here to the right is, you may recognize it if you've been to Stockholm. It's situated centrally in the city, and the other half of the rock is to the left, situated in central Santiago. I could probably talk about this rock for half an hour. I won't, but just to say that, yeah, Pancho's artwork has a lot of fundamental impact on my thinking as a scientist, as well as Angela's work. So it's been really, really inspiring to work with them, and I'll get back to exactly why that is in just a few moments. I think for me personally, interacting with artists and interacting with people at CERS, it has helped me do science in a little bit of a different way. I think I've been able to take larger risks and also engage in more playful science. I've been, oops, sorry about that. So for instance, I had a real problem writing this paper to the left, this marine ecosystem science on an intertwined planet. I couldn't figure out how to organize the paper. And it was only one night when I was listening to one of my favorite artists, PJ Harvey, that I realized, like, of course, this paper should be organized according to one of her songs. And writing that paper based on sort of the chorus of the song made total sense after I realized that's what I had to do. But I don't think I would have dared do something like that had it not been at CERS. But I did, and I think it worked all right, and people seem to appreciate it. But it was an interesting way for me to try to see how you can interact art as a way to inspire better science. And the paper to the right is a small little piece on a special issue about women in science that talks about equity and representation. And again, this is another paper where I was really inspired by music and was able to sort of build the paper around the song. So these were, I guess, experimentation of integrating sort of science art into my science that, again, I would not have done it had I not been at CERS and learned a little bit about the ways that this can be done. Also, of course, I get to work with really amazing people in Stockholm, and we've been working together to see how we can better engage in interacting between sciences and arts. And this is work by my colleague, Andrew Mary, who with lots of colleagues developed a number of really fantastic science fiction future scenarios about the ocean. And with the help of artist Simon Stollenhag, who's done these beautiful pictures, we were able to also represent them visually in addition to the stories that we were making. So this was, again, sort of an experimentation in trying to interact between science and art and see what happens when you do this. Same thing, just another example from this process of science fiction futures led by Andrew, and another one led by another PhD student, Jessica Spikers, who was also able to really sort of interact and connect these things together in a really nice way. really nice narratives about the future of the ocean. Another example, I think, is from my colleague Robert Blasiak, who's an amazing writer, and who I think is probably the only person in the world who's published twice in Nature the same year with completely insane stories about the futures. So science fiction writing basically in the journal Nature. And if you haven't seen these articles, I would really recommend you reading them because they're really, really, really funny and inspiring. So I think, again, trying to work with colleagues and try to work with them together to push into doing things that they have never done before. And some of these work has been really difficult and time consuming and challenging to do. And some of the PhD defenses has also been very uncomfortable because the PhD committees had no idea what was happening. I thought it was just strange and probably just useless. But I think much of this work has been a little bit before its time, and then it has been able to inspire and engage with lots of other people in this kind of interaction. I know people in the room have been working with some of my colleagues on these science fiction futures, and it's so exciting to see how these approaches are developing, inspired by many others, of course, as well. But it's just nice to see that there's so much that can be done in this interaction between the sciences and the arts, this sort of exploration of new things. I think, in essence, for me to absorb arts more into my science has made me a much better scientist. Colleague Evin Pash and I, we wrote a paper a couple of years ago about the reality of science and the way that we are really only rushing towards a few ways of measuring success and trying to be efficient in ways that are really inefficient, and trying to be creative in ways that really aren't creative. And in this paper, we talk about how science really is becoming unsustainable, and how we really need to be much more sort of aware of the need to slow down and hang out with dogs and whatever. And sorry, these assistants are really interesting, but what? Sorry. Anyways, I'll try to concentrate on this paper. Another example also by with Øyvind. Again, you can still see the other paper included lots of inspiration from Pancho's rock, and talks quite a little bit about how both scientists and artists relate to the material that they are working with. This paper on altruism that we described was also very much inspired by Angela's painting and the pumas that she draw in during the pandemic when the pumas were in the city of Santiago. Jesus. Sorry, give me 1 second. So it's hard to concentrate when you have 4 dogs on top of you. So again, using art as a source of inspiration and as a source of, as a means to have different kinds of conversations has been very useful. We've been using Angela's art a lot in sort of seminars and conversations that become just very different because they are not just sort of logical and rational scientific. They also inspire your imagination and lets you have different conversations. When my colleague Carl Folke wrote a background paper to a Nobel laureate symposium that we hosted in Stockholm a few years ago, he included one of her paintings, this Caipacha painting, as an illustration of the biosphere. And this here is just an illustration of a presentation that Carl was doing during this session. And it's just to say that, I mean, art can be so many things, and in this instance, maybe it was just decoration, but it is really a source of inspiration and an opportunity to do many new things. So again, this is Angela and Pancho, my Chilean artist friends and colleagues, and this is them visiting my seabird colony, or the seabird colony in which I work in Sweden. And I think it's really, we've been interacting now for almost 10 years, and we never really had a plan for what we were doing, but we know we wanted to do something, and we knew that we wanted to learn from each other. And having them visiting the colony where I work and interact with the animals that I work with has been really nice for me to be able to communicate who I am and what I'm doing and what my science is. The same way that interacting with them and spending time with them in Chile has helped me understand how they are working and how they are thinking. So I think, in essence, what I've learned working with them is really about using intuition much more in science and not focusing entirely on sort of this rational, logical way of thinking that scientists are mostly trained to do, but really following intuition and listening more carefully to it. I've also learned a lot about how scientists and artists relate to material, and the way that scientists, we work with material in ways that are different from artists sometimes, but also really exciting to learn how artists are really exploratory scientists in many ways, and learn more about materials and their history and the technologies, same way that scientists explore their data in so many different ways. I've also learned quite a lot about failure and the way that scientists are often trained not to fail, and how artists are trained to always fail, because that's really how you learn, and the need to take risks. And also, if I have a few more minutes, I'd like to show a few pictures on transformation, which is a word we as scientists use all the time, but it was only last week I finally understood what the word transformation means. So do you have 5 more minutes, Jorge, to just illustrate pictures of transformations?
Yes, go ahead, Henrik.
Okay. So this is a steel spring. It's one of those things, a shock absorber for a vehicle, and this steel spring is particularly good because it's high in carbon. And this is a picture from Pancho's workshop here in Pirque, outside of Santiago. And I find it really interesting that when you cut this spring off and you start putting it in the forge and straightening it out, it doesn't look like a spring anymore. It looks like something completely different. And here's a dog you know already, since it's just now. And heating this straight part of the steel spring up, it becomes moldable, of course. And if you put it in one of these hammers that is about 100 years old and was used to create railroads, it becomes different again. And if you keep on working with it and keep on hammering it and keep on molding it, it starts to become something that looks like a knife. And then you can start filing it and shaping it further. And when you temper it, you have to be very careful with the tempering. And if you do it wrong, and if you temper it and then put it on cold surface, you will break the damn thing. So even masters make mistakes. I'm sorry, I think I lost you. So do you hear me okay, Jorge?
Yes, you're back.
Oh, okay, great. So basically what I said is that we worked on this knife the entire day and tempered it and accidentally put it on a cold surface, which made this steel knife looking thing crack completely. And you know, as a scientist, when you work on something forever and it's really easy to become attached to it and think that you failed when it didn't turn out the way you did. But of course, the first thing that Pancho said when he broke this knife was, okay, it will be another knife then. So what you see here is like the part of the thing that broke, and then the new knife that we started to make out of it right away. We just kept on working as if the break hadn't happened, and as if the break was just something that had to happen. And we kept on tempering it, and we made these nice little holes in it, and we made this nice little ginkgo in it. And we started filing it and shaping it, and then it turned into this beautiful knife out of this steel spring. So in Pancho's own words, you know, anything can become anything, and I think this transformation really illustrates what change is from something to something else. Still the same material, still the same steel spring. It's just a completely different function. So I just want to say, finally, what I've learned from all this is like art is really about the love for the material, the way that science is about the love for the material that we're working with, and that we shouldn't be afraid of failing, because failures are almost always progress if you think about it in the longer term. And I think finally with Sarah's, I think there's a lot of the time that we feel like we're not doing anything, we're just walking around and talking. But that's actually the most useful thing I've ever done, to engage in these projects and the conversations that they don't have a goal, and they don't have a product, and they don't have a timeline, and they can last a decade, but still they're much more useful and interesting than everything else I do in science. So yeah, thank you very much for that and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you for sharing your personal and professional experience between science and art, which at the same time was a little review of the background on the same topic for Sarah's. That definitely will help us to contextualize better what we are doing here today. You just reminded me a couple of things that we can put on the table right now. One is that there is a very good exhibition going on in the Centro Cultural de España, right? That's the name of the place in downtown Montevideo with Spanish artists. It's a carbon zero. It's supposed to be carbon zero impact exhibition. It's interesting also then from the curatorial point of view. But I think that if any of you is going to spend some more time in Uruguay before getting into your plane and you're going back to Montevideo, I recommend that exhibition in the Centro Cultural de España. And another thing that Henry put on the table is that we can always, if we find it appropriate by tomorrow, we can think of a scientific publication, or maybe more than one, and we can work on finding a venue for that publication as well. Other than that, we are open for conversation, for any questions or any comments to Henrik. Henrik, I noticed that the non-human was trying to be part of your presentation. I think not only the animals, but the Andes were trying to make an intervention as well in your presentation at a certain moment. So the floor is open. If it is too early for using English, you can warm up in Spanish and then we can translate a little bit, but after 11, you will have to do it in English anyway. Maria Teresa?
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm very interested in the ways that you are engaging with play and art and imagination. If you could be a little more specific about how actually you engaged with them, and if there was some kind of fear or trepidation when you started allowing yourself to go to these places you hadn't gone before. I'm just very, very interested in the process in your own mind as a scientist about how you allowed yourself to actually go to places that are not considered typical for your kind of research. So it's really more a process question.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. it's a hard one too. I think it's just been, when I was first invited to the CERS meeting, in a meeting between science and art, I thought, well, I don't know anything about that. I don't think I have any right to be there, and I don't think I have anything to contribute. And my boss, Carl Folke, said, no, you have to go. You will like it there. And I realized how much I like it. And I also realized how much I learned. And I also realized I actually had something to contribute. I mean, I knew the birds. That was my contribution. But I realized that in the conversations between the science that I do and the appreciation for the animals and the ecosystems in which I work, it was really similar to the way artists work. And we could relate at that fundamental level about, how we appreciate beauty or with it somehow. So I think it was just a process of building confidence, of realizing that this is actually something that I can do and also something that I want to. So I think Sarah's, in a way, helped me release some of the sort of unreleased things I felt as a scientist. I mean, sort of being forced to engage as a scientist with always very rational, logical, statistical, empirical issues. Well, if you're in a seabird colony, you're always overwhelmed by smells and sounds, and it's really not something you can measure that easy. So I think it's just building confidence and building relationships with people that you like and trust helped me a lot. And working with Angela and Pancho, I really felt that we understood each other, and we really wanted to learn from each other. So I think that just made me feel like, okay, this is a space that I want to be in. It was a bit uncomfortable, but I thought, I'm just going to see what happens. And then I think over time, just with small progressive steps, let's put some music into this scientific article. Let's put some art into this article. Let's talk to a poet about this article. Let's put more art in my scientific presentations. And now I'm finishing a book that's just completely based on empirical science, but it also has lots of music and art and all kinds of strange things. So I think it's just over time, just doing more and more of it and taking larger and larger steps into that interaction. So I don't know if that's a good question, but I think it's just daring something new and realize, oh, that actually worked, and then taking the next steps. But all the time working with people that I really like and trust, and sort of building experiences over time. I think it's also, of course, easier, becoming a professor and having a stable position and really nothing to lose has helped me a lot, obviously. So I realize what a privilege that is.
Thank you very much.
We have one more question for you, Henrik.
But the dog is very distracting. Hi, Henrik. My name is Flor.
Hi.
I'm an Argentinian actually living and working in Sweden as a researcher. And I was going to ask you, thank you for your presentation, but I was going to ask you precisely about what you just mentioned. You referred to a 10-year process or so. And if I think of my normal work, I'm an associate professor at a Swedish university, and my normal work doesn't allow the kind of work that you have been doing. It's just not designed. So I was wondering if you might say a bit about the material conditions that made possible these 10 years of collaborating with Sarah's and having the freedom to play and to slow down and stuff.
Yeah, so I think I've been it's very Lutheran, I have to do the hard work so I can have the pleasure also. I've been over this 10 years, I'm mostly a marine ecologist. I'm mostly a scientist that is working with, understanding the management of marine resources. I'm mostly a scientist that apply for grants and do basic stuff. But then 1 week a year, I get to go to Uruguay and just forget about my normal scientific identity, and I can be something else that I probably get much more energy from. So it's been a little bit of a window that I've had, and I've been part of the CERS advisory board. So it's been a natural thing for me to have this 1 week a year. But then over time, been able to find grants and able to find opportunities to really expand on this, while also try to infuse the sort of the CERS inspiration into my normal work, and then try to develop something like, for instance, this book manuscript I mentioned, which is really in my mind, like 50% empirical work and 50% narrative storytelling and sort of an arts project almost, is something I've been able to do because of some grants that I've been able to obtain. But it's been like almost like a hobby part of my scientific career that over time I've been able to integrate and find funding for. So I realize it's so difficult, but I think what we have to do together is build more of these experiences, publish more of these papers, publicize some of these experiences, illustrate what it does to scientific creativity, and really communicate much more clearly how incredibly valuable this is for scientific creativity and for all kinds of different interesting progress. Because I think then funding agencies and other sort of university institutional aspects will help us do this as a normal part of the job, which it absolutely has to be in order for us to be good scientists. But I agree with you, there's really difficult conditions to do this. But I think those conditions are improving, but I think we also have to together help communicate why they are so important.
Thank you.
Have anything on the chat, on the Zoom? Pablo?
¿Puedo hacer la pregunta en castellano?
Sí.
¿Me ayuda a traducir?
Sí.
Decirle que estoy muy impresionado por el trabajo y que también hemos llegado hasta las pinturas de Ángel Alegre, buscando la historia social del mundo.
Henrik, Pablo is very much impressed by your presentation. He comes from Chile, so he's already familiar, and they have been studying and working with Angela's paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Looking for the social history of the puma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Explicar un poco más respecto de qué relevancia tiene esta imagen que ha puesto en un artículo y hablar un poco más de su trabajo con Ángela.
And about the relevance of that image that you use in an article in one of your essays, and in what ways that image is relevant for you or for your work.
Well, the image is relevant for different reasons. I think the illustration of the very colorful puma that I showed, that was in a presentation. I mean, in Andean mythology, that represents Kai Pacha, the living world, the world of and I think the pumas that Angela painted that we had in the paper, they really represented sort of what happens when humans temporarily leave the cities. That's when the pumas came into Santiago, as I'm sure you're aware. And the paper we wrote was on altruism and how humans are able to support each other and learn from each other and create new norms under times of crisis. And we were describing some of the environmental crisis and the way that humans need to sort of expand their scope of concern and expand their way of engaging and supporting other individuals. So part of the example was also about how humans have interacted and changed behaviors during the pandemic. And that's where we use the pumas as an illustration of the unexpected side effects of changes in human behaviors.
So thank you very much, Henry. We won't be taking more of your time. Thank you for a great conversation. And in fact, we're going to follow some of your advice. And the real problem is that we have one technical problem that we need to solve. So instead of continuing with Steven's presentation right now, we will reconvene at 11. So we're kind of switching the time of the coffee break or the mate break, if there is any around, and reconvene at 11 and slow down a little bit and get us started with the conversations. And because I have to talk also with Gustavo and Leandro, so I'll use that time myself for reconnecting with these two friends. Thank you, Henry, very much.